Welcome to Sound Vitality. This is Richard Lee, and I will be talking to you today about a theory that's come out of some of our research that combustion is the heart of metabolic disease. This is a very, perhaps it will become a controversial issue, but at this point it's a theory that hasn't gone much beyond here. So this is a big deal because we are today presenting it to the world. And you may find it extremely useful because metabolic disease is, of course, the main cause of pain and suffering and medical costs. And if there's a simple answer to it, it's really good to know. Okay, and I'm proposing that combustion is the issue, precisely combustion, and not a lot of other things. I'm sure you're thinking, well, what about this, what about this, what about this? But let's start at the beginning. Okay, first off, what is the generally accepted cause of metabolic illness? Metabolic illness would be diabetes, heart disease, strokes, from aging, degenerative kidneys, eyesight, loss of hearing, neuropathy in the legs from diabetic or whatever conditions. So all these things that are sort of these metabolic diseases, and they all trace back to free radicals. Free radicals in the body. Free radicals are the cause of metabolic disease from the standpoint of the medical profession and basic biomedical research. And we have the question, what are free radicals? So free radicals are molecules that generally have been ionized or broken apart or otherwise have frazzled ends, usually a positive or negative charge, so that they want to connect to other molecules in the body. The higher energy they are, the more they are likely to connect to important chemicals in the body that can upset the functioning of the body. The way that we're going to look at free radicals is from the standpoint of the energy that they carry. Let's see. Before we do that, let's look at what are antioxidants, because this is a very important question relative to free radicals. Antioxidants are chemicals which, when they come in contact with free radicals, will have the free radicals react with them, bond together, so the two can be eliminated from the body. There are also antioxidant enzymes that can repeatedly disable free radicals within the body, and those are cool too. Okay, so now let's talk a little bit about antioxidants, because this is the big theory of metabolic disease. Basically, it is known that we have excess free radicals in us. And it is generally believed that if we eat antioxidants, we will disable most of those free radicals and be substantially healthier and have metabolic disease disappear. And this appears to be true. There are all kinds of diets around: the low-calorie diet, low-carb diet, low-fat diet, high-fat diet, high-protein diet, low-protein diet, all these different kinds of diets. And if you look at them all, they all somewhere say, and have lots of raw fruits and vegetables. And that's the source of antioxidants. Basically, raw fruits and vegetables are filled with phytochemicals, which are living chemicals within the body that do many things, and most of what they do is an antioxidant function, removing free radicals from the body. So this means that just by eating fresh fruits and vegetables, you can undo a lot of free radical damage because they're so good at removing free radicals from the environment. And you can see this in plants. Plants that are out there in the sun all day getting lots of high energy ultraviolet shining on them have developed the ability to get rid of all the excess energy and remain vibrant and full. And if we eat them while they're still living, or while they still contain the phytonutrients in them, we gain that antioxidant benefit from them. So that's basically how that works. And so we may find that most every diet, specialty diet, fad diet, the answer diet, comes down to eating fresh fruits and vegetables, and that the main reason these diets fail, when they do fail, is because people eat protein powders, canned nutrient things, anything that's processed, stored, heated, preserved, anything with shelf life generally has the phytonutrients disabled, oxidized, destroyed through heating or whatever it is. So generally the difference between a successful magical diet and a magical diet that doesn't work is probably the amount of fruits and vegetables that a person eats. That's kind of an idea of antioxidants and how important they are to metabolic disease and to free radicals. Okay, now, what the medical and research groups have done is search, since free radicals are so important and there seem to be so many of them in the body that cause all these diseases, where do they come from? It's hard to imagine that they come, too many of them come from food. Yes, French fries can be full of free radicals because you take potatoes and put them in hot oil and it basically burns and frazzles all the edges of them, which creates all kinds of high energy products of combustion. Basically, the French fries, when you get done, are browned. They're cooked. They're in a way burned on the outside, so that when you eat them, you are consuming free radicals. Meat might be very healthy. I understand that grass-fed beef is substantially healthier than other kinds of beef. The key is, if you put it on the barbecue until it's burned, it's going to be a source of free radicals. And if you put it in stew, which a whole lot of people probably don't appreciate, it's probably not going to have nearly the free radicals in it, if any free radicals. I don't know. Basically, they couldn't find a whole lot of free radicals that are enough to account for the amount of free radicals that people have in their bodies. So we have the question of where does it come from? Okay, so they looked at mitochondria. Mitochondria are, in every cell of the body, there are mitochondria, which are these little compartments within their own membrane that process sugars. They basically take any sugar and through a process of about 10 enzymes manage to turn those sugars into water and carbon dioxide and then extract the heat or the energy out of them to run the body. I'm using mitochondria right now to be able to move around and talk to you. Okay, so they theorize that mitochondria, because it produces all of these molecules that technically would be free radicals if they were loose in the body, maybe these mitochondria are the source of free radicals in the body. But it turns out that free radicals produced by mitochondria occasionally escape from this cycle of producing energy and go hit the membrane of the mitochondria. But then as the membrane gets more and more damaged, the mitochondria stops working and it's simply replaced. So it doesn't appear that the mitochondria is responsible for, there may be some cases where it is, but in most cases of metabolic disease, it appears that the mitochondria is not the issue. So then what about inflammation? Inflammation is clearly chemicals that are free radicals that have lots of stuff that cause inflammation and cause a call for help, damage other cells and things. Could those be a source of free radicals? And I didn't find any evidence in the research that they are. They're much more a focal point of free radicals. Free radicals in the body tend to be expressed in a particular location. So somebody who has lots of free radicals, if they have arthritis, the free radicals might be expressing in the knuckles of their hands. Or if they have whatever the inflammatory condition is, that's where the free radicals are expressing. This is a very interesting concept that we're going to deal with in our next webinar, which is more how do we direct these free radicals in our body through our unconscious, basically the unconscious conditioned responses of our cells. That's a different topic. But the important thing here is that inflammation doesn't appear to be a source of free radicals. It appears to be a focal point where free radicals are directed in the body. Okay, so let's look at what I consider to be, and this is obviously a debatable theory, so take it as much as it feels true. And I hope scientists will take it seriously and discover that it is truly useful. Let's take our first free radical. This, you're going to have to use your imagination, is a cigarette. And I don't smoke, so I don't have any cigarettes to show you. Okay, and if we light up a cigarette and we puff it, what are we doing? We are burning hydrocarbons with some extra stuff in them, and as we breathe air through the cigarette, we're carrying oxygen in to the point of fire. There's essentially a combustion process going on, and the fire gets brighter as we bring oxygen through it, and the oxygen is broken into it's usually O2. It's broken into oxygen ions, which are free radicals. And the heat and the flame breaks, or the smoldering in the case of cigarettes, breaks up the molecules of the tobacco into separate atoms, hydrogen, they're hydrocarbons mostly, so it's hydrogen and carbon, breaks it up, and so the oxygen from the air mixes with the hydrogen and the carbon and produces water and carbon dioxide, just like the mitochondria did. But this is at a very high energy. We have all of these, basically oxygen and hydrogen combining, oxygen and carbon combining, and each time they combine, this reaction involves them coming together and releasing a high energy photon. So that high energy photon is released. Often it will go hit another tobacco and help to contribute to its combustion. Often they will just fly out of the cigarette and hit something in the atmosphere. It could be an oxygen, it could be ionizing another oxygen, it could be hit water and ionize it. But this high energy photon goes hit something else and ionizes it. So what we're going to do now is we're going to breathe in and have all that air flow through, right through the flame front, collecting all those free radicals, or a lot of them, because some of them get away, and suck those high energy free radicals, the free radicals being all these atoms that are ionized and highly reactive, breathe them into our lungs. And of course, the result is often chronic cough, emphysema, lung cancer. But also, smoking is associated with heart disease and cancer and a variety of other metabolic diseases. So these cigarettes are a way to introduce the products of combustion directly into the body and cause free radicals to skyrocket. So this is one of the methods that combustion is illustrated to be at the center of metabolic disease. Okay, let's go, because we know that most of you don't smoke. So you can say, what does that have to do with me? And that's fair enough. Okay, so now we're going to go to... Now you're going to have to use your imagination again. Imagine that this is half filled with water. Oh, that's better, just like that. And that water, now this is pure water, water with no impurities in it. And basically, for those of you familiar with chemistry, or those of you who are not familiar with chemistry, water is made of hydrogen and oxygen, and even pure water has some degree of dissociation of hydrogen and oxygen, which means in addition to water in here, H2O, there is some H plus bouncing around in there, and some OH minus, separate ions, free radicals, that are floating around. About 1/10,000,000th of the water is dissociated into these free radicals. And this has been kind of strange to me for a long time. Why? Why would it not just come together and all be water? And the answer is, I keep ducking to the side so I can get it around my glass. The answer is that each time those free radicals, the OH and the hydrogen, combine, they produce another photon, high energy ultraviolet photon, that goes a little distance, hits another water molecule, and ionizes it. So there's a constant amount of ionized water in here because there's a constant amount of ultraviolet in here. Okay, so now what if we take a fluorescent light that produces ultraviolet and apply it to the water? As we add ultraviolet to the water, we are going to increase the amount of ultraviolet in the water. We're going to cause more of the water molecules to ionize. Instead of 1 in 10 million water molecules being ionized, there's going to be some higher number, and it's not really that variable because of the nature of water and how it holds ions. But there's going to be an increase as a result of the fluorescent light. And as a result of that, the water is also going to become more reactive. It's going to become more likely to react with anything that's in there and cause basically free radicals to influence, whether it's a finger or rust or whatever it would be, begin to interact more with whatever's in there. And if we then take away the fluorescent light, over time the hydrogen and oxygen will recombine, and ultraviolet photons will be emitted that escape from the system, and the concentration will come back down again. Okay, this is an important concept that is the basis of this whole concept of combustion and free radicals. Let me talk a little bit now about the fluorescent light itself. This is a quartz tube that allows ultraviolet to pass through. A normal fluorescent light has a white coating on the inside that absorbs most of the ultraviolet, and a glass tube that absorbs additional ultraviolet. But this one is designed to produce ultraviolet, and so current goes through ionizing mercury vapor that produces this high-frequency ultraviolet that I can use in my experiments. In an office building, some ultraviolet does escape from fluorescent lights. To some extent, fluorescent lights contribute to the free radical, basically the ultraviolet concentration in the room, which affects the ultraviolet concentration in the human body, just like it affects the ultraviolet concentration and the free radical concentration in the beaker. So just by living under fluorescent lights, we're going to have a somewhat higher level of free radicals in our bodies and basically be more reactive and be more likely to have metabolic diseases. Okay, so that's a significant point. I don't know how much fluorescent lights contribute to metabolic disease, but in theory, they contribute. Okay, let's go on now to something that contributes in a much bigger way. We're going to invert our beaker and turn it into, in your imagination, a cylinder of a car engine. And we need a piston. So here is our piston to the car engine. Use your imagination. And we're going to slide the piston in the cylinder. And then we have a combustion chamber. And in this combustion chamber, as you know, we put in some gasoline and some oxygen in the form of air. And we compress it up, spark it, and we get combustion. A major flame goes through this combustion chamber. Massive amounts of ionized oxygen, ionized hydrogen, ionized carbon flow all around and begin to recombine into carbon dioxide and water vapor again. That's the main products of combustion in cigarettes, in mitochondria, and in combustion of hydrocarbons. Okay, now in mitochondria, the efficiency of converting hydrocarbons, or carbohydrates as they call them, from sugars into usable energy is about 80%. It's a very high level of efficiency. And then the chemicals aren't entirely controlled and a little bit escapes. In the car engine, in theory, the car engine can be 75% efficient. However, in actuality, a fully loaded car engine that burns gasoline is about 25% efficient. And when the car engine is cruising on the freeway at 65 miles an hour, it's at fairly low load, and its efficiency is about 10%. Where does the extra energy go? So we have a combustion chamber here. We've just burned gasoline, produced a flame front, produced a bunch of free radicals around in that chamber, and they're recombining to form CO2 and water vapor and ejecting gobs and gobs of ultraviolet as a result of the reaction. And the ultraviolet, instead of going into producing energy, is just going into the walls of the engine. It turns out steel can absorb ultraviolet. And so the steel, like a sponge, soaks up this ultraviolet, and then the ultraviolet starts coming out of the other side of the car engine. And when ultraviolet leaves the car engine on the outside, it will run into air, of course, and oxygen or water vapor. And this level of photon, this energy of photon that was produced by the combination of oxygen and hydrogen combining, goes and hits another water molecule and dissociates it into hydrogen and OH. So we have free radicals produced in the air as a result of this UV escaping from the car engine. Okay, so now one interesting thing about car engines is that there's a cable connected to the engine that goes off to the frame of the car and is bolted on to ground the car engine to the car. And this cable, being metal, copper, conducts the ultraviolet from the car engine into the frame of the car. And the body of the car is bolted onto the frame of the car, so this ultraviolet flows into the body of the car. Now, if you're familiar with riding in old cars from a long time ago, it was absolutely exhausting. It was stressful. It was overwhelming. You needed to take a break every once in a while because it was tough. And that's because the doors and the dash and the other parts of the car were metal, and the metal conducts the ultraviolet. But car manufacturers have learned that if you insulate people from the metal of the car by coating everything in plastic, then people don't get nearly as much ultraviolet from the car trip, and they have a much more comfortable ride. So coating everything in plastic is one of the ways that cars have been made substantially more comfortable. So now we're to the point of the car engine being a massive producer of ultraviolet energy in the environment. And this ultraviolet energy is in the range of UVB, maybe a little UVC, and most of that is from the sun. Most of that is entirely eliminated by the ozone layer. So not much of it gets to ground level. That's basically manages to create an environment where human life and animal life is quite practical because the ultraviolet's brought way down. But car engines are producing a massive amount of this ultraviolet at ground level that gets into the bodies, just like when we have the fluorescent light aiming into the water. The ultraviolet gets into the human body, increases free radical concentration by ionizing whatever molecules it happens to hit. It can hit water, it can hit glucose, it can hit proteins, it can hit anything and ionize it, and then we have free radicals in the body. Okay, so that's quite a theory, because if this theory is true, it means that simply by reducing the ultraviolet that we are exposed to, metabolic disease will mostly disappear. So I went looking for evidence that this might be true. And I thought, okay, now where can we find evidence that it's true? And I thought about it and I realized, well, China has a very rapidly developing economy and a huge excess of cars on the road. Cars everywhere, and roads that are just bumper to bumper in cars that aren't going anywhere but are sitting there idling. Just massive industrialization, massive concentration. And so that would indicate that we might find a high degree of metabolic disease in China. So I looked it up, and sure enough, China now is the world's leader in diabetes. That's an impressive statistic. In Shanghai, the leading cause of death is heart disease, and the second leading cause of death is cancer. This is a radical shift from the past. Metabolic disease has taken hold big time in China. Okay, so we see that China shows signs of having combustion, car engine combustion, causing metabolic disease. Now, I looked further and discovered that Chinese researchers have realized this. They're studying hydroxyl in the atmosphere and its relationship to metabolic disease, and studying ways to decrease hydroxyl in the body. One study I saw was looking at Chinese herbs to absorb free radical or absorb hydroxyl from the body to protect the body from hydroxyl, the OH. And they went further, and they correlated hydroxyl concentration in the environment, in the atmosphere, to UVB concentration. Basically, high energy ultraviolet goes higher and hydroxyl is higher. So they're seeing this concept. You add a fluorescent light to a beaker of water and the OH goes up. They're seeing it in the real world. They're seeing it in Shanghai and Beijing. So that's good evidence. And while that research is just beginning, there isn't a massive amount of research on this. There are researchers who have found this. Now, there's an important concept here that the human body has the ability to survive, to handle a whole lot of situations. And so how does the human body handle an excess of free radical, an excess of ultraviolet that penetrates the body and creates free radical? The body has ways of storing free radicals to get them out of the way. Basically, we need them out of the bloodstream because when they're in the bloodstream, that's when they damage kidneys, damage hearing, damage eyesight, damage arteries, all kinds of things. So one of the ways is to transfer them to fats, making high energy fatty acids and storing them in fat cells. And you've got to create a lot of fat cells or make really big fat cells in order to store if you're in a chronic basis of ultraviolet overload. Another place, lactic acid. Lactic acid is high energy free radicals, and those generally are eliminated over time. They're stored in the muscles and gotten rid of. And then we have what are called AGE, which means that when you get a free radical coming in and hitting a sugar and breaking the sugar in half, making it highly reactive, and then it goes and sticks to things, specifically to collagen, it just stores away. It causes the body to get stiffer and stiffer. It interferes with a lot of things. It's a big part of what makes the blood vessels stiff, increasing hypertension and contributing to heart disease. And so that's AGEs are stored over decades, gradually building up in the body. And we have an AGE reader, it's called, and you put your arm on it, and a little ultraviolet shines into your arm, and whatever comes back is measured, and it determines how much AGE, these high energy byproducts of combustion of glucose, are stuck in your body. They found that the higher the concentration, the more likely you are to have diabetes, heart disease, and all those sorts of things. They also found that the amount in your body generally correlates with age. So the longer you are alive, the more of these things you tend to accumulate. So this is interesting. And we did a study where we took a device that reduces ultraviolet. Basically, it absorbs ultraviolet and converts it to lower energy. I and other people in my company tried them out. And first time I tried it out, it didn't seem to do anything, so I didn't worry about it. And then about 6 months ago, something else came up, I don't remember what it was, that I realized that this was an important technology. So I put it back on. And I wore it I've been wearing it ever since. Then when we retested me 4 months later, my AGE had dropped about 20%. According to their reading, my age had dropped from about 58 to about 45. So basically, when it appears that because we can't use this as solid research because the researcher is not allowed to be the test subject. But anyway, it appears that as we pulled ultraviolet out of the body, the free radicals, the plus and the minus free radicals, were able to recombine and then be eliminated from the body. We were essentially turning off the fluorescent light so that the water molecules could recombine within the water. So this was most interesting. So here we are. We've made it to the point where we've started a double-blind, placebo-controlled test. And we have urine tests to test free radical level in the urine. We have 2 different medallions. One of them, I have them both here. This is fun. One of them is ready to be worn. One of them is not ready to be worn. And you can't see, but one has a G on it and one has an H on it. And one of them is real and one of them is a sham device. One of them works and the other one doesn't. So we have this blinded. I don't know which is which. And I'm going to give to somebody tomorrow to get them started on this experiment. They're going to test their urine, use one for a day, test their urine again, use the other one for a day, test the urine again, and use the first one for a day. And we're going to see how free radical level in the urine varies according to which of these they use. And in this way, instead of Richard being the researcher and the subject of the research, we're going to have a double-blinded controlled study to find out whether we can really gain the effect of removing free radicals from the body with these devices which absorb ultraviolet radiation. Another question that is a natural question that I want to deal with is, what about other ways of dissipating ultraviolet? One of the clear ones is taking your shoes off and putting your feet on grass, or walking in dirt, or going to the beach and putting your feet in the ocean or in the lake, or even taking a shower. All of these things tend to give the ultraviolet in your body a pathway to go. And so this is even walking in nature. If you have a forest where you can walk and there are all these living trees and things, they tend to absorb the excess ultraviolet and create an environment which is much lower energy and tends to pull the ultraviolet out of you. Just as riding airplanes, just as riding in one of the old cars that fills you full of ultraviolet, or airplanes, particularly the older airplanes that aren't lined in plastic on the inside, when you are feeling like that, you get frazzled, you get overloaded, you get stressed. And when you take your shoes off and walk bare feet on the earth or in the grass or in the ocean or among trees, even with your shoes on among trees, there is a liberation. There is a decrease in the level of energy in your body. And so it appears that in addition to eating raw food, if you do like eating French fries and hamburgers, you may be able to partially compensate for that by simply taking your shoes off and walking on the lawn or wherever daily. Once a day for a little while can dissipate the ultraviolet. And remember, your body has a storage ability. It can dissipate it, and it can collect it and save it until it's ready to dissipate again. So dissipating it every day can be very helpful. Okay, that covers my presentation for today. We are ready to open up to questions. So I've opened the microphone. Does anybody have a question to ask? Okay, the question is, how does ribeye steak affect this whole question of health? And that's a complicated question. Obviously, if you boil it, You're not going to get as many free radicals as if you barbecue it. And if you barbecue it until it's black, you're going to get even more free radicals. But there are other issues as well. If you eat vegetables that were grown on a field, you get a certain level of pesticides and different sorts of things. And if you eat an animal who's been eating lots of this grain, they tend to concentrate some of these factors. So there are multiple factors, and there's no good or bad. And can you walk on the beach or in the grass and counteract a ribeye steak? I don't know. Perhaps future researchers will answer this question. Okay. Any other questions? Okay. Suzanne Jordan sent in a question. She says, how about fresh produce being displayed in the store under UV light being less wholesome than frozen? What a creative question. And certainly frozen will, to some extent, decrease the free or the antioxidants in a food, and being under ultraviolet lights will increase free radicals in a food, decrease antioxidants in a food, and just by having the vegetables sitting there in the store and aging and being subject to oxidation over time decreases ultraviolet. So sometimes freezing is better than aging, being out in the open. Sometimes aging might be better. Having your own garden is the best. So there's my answer. Any other questions?
Okay, and then Isabel posted the question, will you have the device you were talking about that removes ionization available for purchase when testing is complete?
We will have that device available. Basically, I visited the manufacturer, and he is making prototypes now. It's a little more advanced than the one I showed you. This one makes a good placebo-controlled device. But we will have samples in a week probably, and have production units in a couple of weeks. So at that time, we will be able to sell these devices as environmental conditioning devices, basically devices that essentially what it does is it rests on your heart center, connects with your magnetic field, which extends beyond your body. Any ultraviolet that's in the field will tend to come into the antenna and then be dissipated in the structure of it. And those should be available in 2 weeks. Okay, thank you all very much for attending. Bye.